Okay, so you're someone who's not content with just, accepting things at face value. You want to understand the why.
Yeah.
You're driven by this intellectual curiosity to really get to the,
The deeper levels.
the heart of things, the deeper levels,
Absolutely.
and to see the kind of the mechanisms, the patterns behind those big changes that have shaped history.
Yeah.
And well, today we're gonna embark on this fascinating deep dive into a really profound shift,
A really profound shift.
historical decline of violence.
It's a big one. Yeah.
And in many forms, we're not just talking about one kind of violence. We're talking about violence in its many permutations.
Yeah. So forget about those fleeting news cycles and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
We're going deep.
We're going deep
For
into a
sure.
substantial body of work here.
Yes.
Primarily drawing from Steven Pinker's The Better Angels of Our Nature.
Of course.
This is about opinions.
This is about, a meticulous analysis of centuries of data, historical data, combined with these sharp insights from psychology.
Yes.
So we're really looking at long-term trends
Yeah.
and, the real, analytical muscle.
The data to back it up.
Yeah,
It's not just someone's opinion. This is like
absolutely.
hard research.
It is.
So, yeah, if your intellectual curiosity has led you here, you're in the right place.
You're in the right spot.
Our mission is to unpack this remarkable story
Yeah.
of declining violence, and we're going to try to pinpoint those core reasons and extract the most compelling insights,
Yeah.
to help us understand, where we are as a species.
Well, we've been where we're going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's start
Let's do it.
by looking at something pretty fundamental, I think.
I think so, too.
The decline of homicide.
Yeah. What's really striking when you look at the long view of history is the sheer scale of this drop.
Yeah.
If you look at homicide rates in Europe, starting from the Middle Ages onward.
Right. The numbers just paint this really vivid picture. Estimates suggest back then you were looking at something like 4 to 100 homicides per 100,000 people each year.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a
4 to 100.
4 to 100.
It's a huge range.
It is a huge range, but even at the low end, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
And then you compare that to contemporary rates.
Right.
The difference is astounding.
It's crazy, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not just this broad continental trend either.
Okay.
If you look at localized data, like the Kent series in England,
Yep.
which goes back all the way to the 16th century,
It's great.
you see this really, really significant downward trend at a more granular level, too.
So it's not just, like Europe as a whole. It's like little pockets.
Right, very local.
Specific areas.
Exactly.
That's amazing. I mean, it's almost unimaginable for us today
It is.
to live in a society where the risk of being murdered was potentially 100 times greater than it is now.
That's,
What were the fundamental shifts
yeah.
that led to such a profound change?
Well, that is the core of the matter, isn't it?
It is.
One of the most influential frameworks for understanding this is from Norbert Elias and his concept of the civilizing process.
Okay.
So his argument, detailed in his work, Sociogenetic and Psychogenetic Investigations.
Wow, what a title.
It's a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah.
But his argument is essentially that over centuries, European populations underwent this significant psychological transformation.
Okay.
So individuals started developing a greater capacity for impulse control.
Yeah.
They started thinking with a longer-term perspective.
Right.
And they became more attuned to the feelings and perspectives of others.
It sounds like kind of a positive feedback loop.
In a way, it is, yeah. So this societal structure, often driven by these codes of honor and the pursuit of revenge,
Yeah.
gradually gave way to one that increasingly valued and emphasized self-restraint.
Okay.
So the key insight here is that these evolving social norms and internal control mechanisms appear to be strongly correlated with the observed decrease in violence.
Okay, so a greater societal emphasis on self-control and considering others, it seems to be a key part of this puzzle.
Right.
Now, I recall reading that early critics felt this theory was somewhat self-referential.
Yeah. Yeah.
Violence decreased because people became less violent.
Right, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a valid critique.
Yeah.
The initial conceptualization of the civilizing process definitely faced that challenge.
Yeah.
It was describing a decline in, various social and psychological factors all at the same time.
Yeah.
Impulsiveness, the rigid adherence to these honor codes, even things like table manners,
Oh, wow.
alongside the reduction in violence.
Interesting.
So it was painting this picture of interconnected changes,
Yeah.
but without always clearly identifying the initial causal drivers.
Yep.
So in other words, it was describing a system evolving,
Mhm.
but not necessarily pinpointing the levers of that evolution.
Yeah. It's kind of like saying that a forest grew taller because the trees got bigger.
Exactly.
It describes the outcome,
Yeah.
but not necessarily the environmental factors
Right.
that caused that growth.
That's a great analogy.
Now, this decline in violence wasn't a perfectly smooth trajectory, was it?
Of course not.
There were periods where things went in the opposite direction
Mm-hmm.
or where progress was uneven.
Absolutely. Historical trends are rarely linear. So,
Right.
for instance, in the mid-19th century, cities like Boston actually experienced an increase in their homicide rates.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that was a trend that was observed in other northeastern urban centers as well, like New York and Philadelphia.
Really?
Yeah.
So there were these like
Little hiccups.
little hiccups in the overall trend.
Exactly.
And if we connect this to the broader picture of homicide rates in the US, figure 314 in Pinker's work reveals this really deeply concerning divergence.
Yep.
Throughout the first half of the 19th century, homicide rates among Black and white Americans were relatively similar
Yeah.
in many regions.
Mm-hmm.
However, a significant racial disparity emerged in the latter half of the century
Right.
and tragically widened considerably throughout the 20th century.
Yes.
So this highlights
It really does.
that progress is not always universal
Right.
and can be significantly impacted by specific social and historical contexts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's a crucial point,
It is.
underscoring that these broad positive trends can mask significant inequalities and setbacks for certain populations.
Yeah.
And what about more recent history? I remember discussions in the 1960s
Uh-huh.
about a potential rise in crime
Right.
and a possible decivilization.
Well, yeah, the 1960s definitely saw a rise in anxieties.
Yeah,
Fueled by increasing crime rates and, evolving social norms.
right.
It led to these concerns that this long-term civilizing trend
Right.
might be reversing.
It's going the other way.
Yeah, but when we examine more recent data...
Yeah. Particularly in Western Europe,
Okay.
as illustrated in Figure 319,
Mm-hmm.
we see a continuation of the decline in homicide rates.
Okay, so it's still going down.
It's still going down.
Yeah.
And in the United States, despite these persistent racial disparities,
Yeah.
targeted interventions have shown that we have a significant capacity to reduce violence.
You're referring to initiatives like the Boston Miracle, right?
Precisely.
That's a compelling example of focused action leading to substantial change.
It is.
So for those who don't know,
Yeah.
the Boston Miracle in the 1990s involved this multifaceted approach,
Yeah.
including increased community-oriented policing
Mm.
and intensive engagement with at-risk youth and street gangs.
Right.
And it resulted in this just remarkable five-fold reduction in the city's homicide rate.
It was huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
So while there have been some fluctuations since then,
Sure.
those rates have generally remained significantly lower than their peak.
Yeah. And these more recent successes suggest that while these long-term psychological and social shifts are really fundamental,
Yeah.
these more immediate and targeted interventions by
Yeah.
institutions like law enforcement
Yeah.
can also play this, really critical role in reducing violence.
So we can sort of like speed up the process
Yeah.
in a way.
You could say that, yeah.
Okay, so we've seen this centuries-long decline in homicide,
Mm-hmm.
punctuated by periods of complexity
Yeah,
and more recent examples of successful intervention.
that's right.
Now let's turn our attention to something that might seem almost fantastical.
I know what you're going to say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in its scope, the humanitarian revolution.
Yeah, how do you even begin to wrap your head around that?
Yeah, what exactly defines this period?
So the really remarkable thing about the humanitarian revolution,
Yeah.
which took place roughly in the 17th and 18th centuries,
Hmm.
is this relatively rapid abandonment of practices that we now consider just utterly inhumane.
Right.
Like, think about it for a second. Yeah.
The swift decline and the widespread persecution and execution of witches.
Oh, yeah?
The systematic use of torture
Right.
as a tool of state and justice.
Yeah.
The just brutal suppression and killing of religious heretics and nonconformists.
Mhm.
And then the burgeoning movement to abolish slavery.
Wow.
I mean, these were deeply entrenched practices.
Right.
Accepted and often vigorously defended for centuries.
Absolutely.
And yet they largely vanished
Yeah.
or began their rapid decline within a comparatively short historical window.
Wow.
The core insight here is that there was this fundamental shift in moral sensibilities,
Yeah.
driven by changing ideas and this growing sense of shared humanity.
Okay, so it's almost impossible to fully grasp a world where burning someone alive for their beliefs was
Yeah.
a routine occurrence.
I know, it's hard to even imagine.
How did this happen? What ignited this profound transformation?
It's a great question, and historians like Payne have noted the precise causes are complex and not entirely clear-cut.
Yeah. Several interconnected factors likely played a role.
Yeah.
Increasing affluence is one possibility,
Oh.
although the direct link isn't always straightforward.
Sure.
While greater wealth can correlate with more stable governance
Yeah.
and higher literacy rates,
Mm,
it doesn't automatically explain why societies would suddenly become less cruel.
that makes sense.
Right.
Simply having more resources doesn't guarantee a more compassionate outlook.
Exactly.
But you also mentioned the impact of the printing press
Uh-huh.
and increased literacy.
Absolutely. The proliferation of the printing press and the rise in literacy rates were transformative.
Yeah.
They facilitated the widespread dissemination of new ideas
Right.
and critiques of existing practices.
Yeah.
Think about the influential thinkers of the Enlightenment.
Right.
Figures like Hobbes, Descartes, Spinoza, Locke, Hume, and Kant.
Yeah, big names.
Yeah, their ideas emphasizing reason individual rights
Mm-hmm.
and the importance of human flourishing
Yeah.
began to circulate far more broadly,
Right.
directly challenging the traditional justifications for cruelty, oppression,
Yeah.
and the divine right of rulers to inflict suffering.
Right.
The American Revolution itself can be seen as a tangible manifestation of these Enlightenment principles applied to governance.
Right. So the printing press was really a game changer in a way.
It was.
I mean, the advent of the printing press
Mm-hmm.
allowed these Enlightenment ideals of reason and individual rights
Right.
to spread rapidly
Yeah,
and directly challenge these justifications
Mm.
for cruelty and oppression.
exactly.
So this rapid dissemination of new ways of thinking
That's right.
was the key lever in this humanitarian revolution.
I think so.
Okay, so the power of ideas
Yeah,
spreading more rapidly than ever before was a crucial catalyst.
it was.
But it wasn't just abstract philosophical arguments, was it?
No, it wasn't.
You also highlighted the role of novels and literature in this shift.
Right. The rise of the novel in particular provided this powerful new medium for fostering empathy and exposing readers to the suffering of others in this really deeply personal way.
Yeah.
Consider Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin,
Yeah.
which had this profound impact on the abolitionist movement
Sure.
by humanizing enslaved people
Right.
and vividly portraying the brutality of slavery.
Yes.
Or think of Charles Dickens's powerful depictions of the inhumane conditions in workhouses
Oh, yeah.
in novels like Oliver Twist and Nicholas Nickleby.
Yeah.
Even narratives of seafaring life like Richard Henry Dana Jr.'s 2 Years Before the Mast
Mm-hmm.
and Herman Melville's works
Yeah.
could expose readers to these harsh realities and injustices,
Or-
broadening their understanding of human suffering.
Yeah.
These stories help to break down societal barriers
Yeah.
and cultivate this greater sense of shared humanity,
Right.
directly challenging prevailing norms.
It's a stark contrast to those pessimistic views of history
Yeah.
as this relentless cycle of conflict and suffering, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. Those cyclical or purely random models of conflict.
Yeah.
That are sometimes presented just seem to miss this clear upward trajectory
Yeah.
in our moral sensibilities and behaviors.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to a truly grand scale.
Okay.
The decline of war.
All right.
This feels particularly relevant
Does it, Timbit?
and perhaps counterintuitive in our modern context.
Yeah.
I mean, you would think that it was just more and more war
Right. You would think so.
as time goes on.
Yeah.
But
not so.
what's immediately fascinating is this concept of the long peace,
Right.
this unprecedented period of no major wars between great powers since the end of World War II.
It's pretty remarkable when you think about it.
It really is.
Yeah.
This is a significant departure from centuries of great power conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Immanuel Kant, well before this period,
Yeah.
theorized about the conditions necessary for perpetual peace,
Right.
the establishment of democratic republics and the formation of a federation of free states,
Like the United Nations.
like the UN, yeah.
Yeah.
While we haven't reached perpetual peace yet, we've certainly witnessed a remarkable decline in interstate warfare.
We have.
Figure 6.1 clearly illustrates a significant drop in battle deaths in state-based armed conflicts since 1900,
Yeah.
with a notable shift from wars between states to primarily within states or civil wars.
Right.
So the overarching insight here is that the cost of large-scale conflict has become prohibitively high
Yeah.
in the modern era due to factors like nuclear weapons and economic interdependence.
Exactly. Nobody wants to, blow up the world, and everyone's kind of relying on each other
Right.
for trade, for
Okay.
resources. So it
Mhm.
gets a lot more complicated.
It does.
Yeah.
So the specter of global annihilation and the interconnectedness of our economies seem to be pretty powerful deterrents
Yeah,
to large-scale interstate war.
I think so.
But what about this long peace specifically?
Yeah.
Is it simply a matter of avoiding a major catastrophe?
Well, it's more than just avoiding the worst case scenario. Several factors are believed to contribute to this sustained period of relative peace between major powers.
Yeah.
The sheer destructive capacity of modern warfare,
Yeah.
especially nuclear weapons, has fundamentally altered the calculus of conflict,
Right.
making large-scale wars far less appealing as a means of achieving political objectives.
Yeah.
The spread of democratic governance,
Right.
aligning with Kant's predictions,
Huh.
also appears to play a significant role,
Yeah.
as democratic nations tend not to engage in armed conflict with one another.
Right.
Furthermore, increasing economic interdependence,
Okay.
where nations benefit significantly from mutual trade and cooperation,
Yeah.
creates powerful disincentives for engaging in wars that would disrupt those vital economic links.
So it's like if you're trading with someone, you're probably not going to go to war with them.
You probably don't want to, yeah. And the growth and influence of international organizations like the UN
Yeah.
provide platforms for diplomacy negotiation and conflict resolution.
Yeah. Offering alternatives to armed conflict.
So it's not like, 100 years ago, or it's like, well, we have a problem.
Right.
Let's just go to war.
Right. Let's just fight about it.
Let's fight about it, yeah.
Now we have other avenues.
There's other avenues
Yeah.
for resolving things.
That's right.
And then there's this new peace.
The new peace.
This further noticeable decline in armed conflict since the end of the Cold War.
Yeah.
What factors are driving this more recent trend?
Well, the end of the Cold War certainly removed a major source of global tension
Yeah.
and, all those numerous proxy conflicts that it fueled.
Right.
However, the continued decline in armed conflicts since that period
Yeah.
suggests that other factors are at play as well.
Okay.
But it is crucial to acknowledge that this decline isn't uniform
Okay.
and without its complexities.
Right.
So while wars between states have become less frequent,
Yeah.
conflicts within states, particularly civil wars,
Uh-huh.
persist in various regions of the world.
Often with just devastating consequences.
Of course.
Figure 6.3 actually illustrates this kind of fluctuating nature of civil wars,
Yeah.
showing that it's not just this, simple linear downward trend.
Right. It goes up and down.
Yeah.
Additionally, when we analyze the impact of war,
Mm-hmm.
we have to also account for the often significant indirect deaths
Right.
resulting from conflict.
Yes.
Things like famine disease and the breakdown of social order.
It ripples outwards.
Yeah, the raw numbers of battlefield casualties don't always capture the full human cost of conflict.
Absolutely.
Right, and where does this horrific phenomenon of genocide fit into this picture of declining violence?
Well, genocide, unfortunately, stands as this really stark and tragic reminder of humanity's capacity for extreme violence.
Yeah.
It's important to distinguish it from conventional warfare. While war involves organized violence between groups,
Yeah.
genocide often requires a specific ideology that dehumanizes and demonizes an entire group, providing this rationale for their systematic extermination.
Right, so it's not just, I'm going to kill you, it's, I'm going to kill you because you're
Right. You're less than human.
less than human.
Yeah, you
Or
don't deserve to live.
don't deserve to live, right?
Yeah.
And as Alexander Solzhenitsyn so powerfully argued, to kill on a scale of millions
Mm-hmm.
requires an ideology,
Yeah.
often rooted in these utopian or exclusionary belief systems
Right.
that justify such atrocities.
That's right.
Statistically, the highest death tolls in genocides are often associated with totalitarian regimes
Yeah.
that possess the power and the ideological framework
Mhm.
to carry out these mass killings.
Right. They have the means and they have the will.
Right, the will.
Yeah.
It's a chilling
Yeah.
but important distinction.
It is.
And then we have terrorism,
Yeah.
which in our modern era often feels like a dominant form of violence.
It does feel that way
Yeah.
because it's just on the news all the time. Right. Well, terrorism is a significant form of asymmetrical warfare,
Yeah.
frequently employed by weaker groups against more powerful adversaries.
Right.
Its primary weapon is the psychological impact of fear,
Yeah.
aiming to create an emotional response far out of proportion to the actual physical damage inflicted.
Right. They want you to be afraid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, surprisingly,
Yeah.
empirical data on the success rate and longevity of terrorist campaigns reveals that they have this remarkably low success rate in achieving their stated strategic goals.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And they tend to have relatively short lifespans.
Okay, so despite the fear and disruption it causes,
Yeah.
it's not typically a sustainable
Right.
or effective long-term strategy
Mm-hmm.
for achieving political aims.
No,
That's actually somewhat counterintuitive
it is.
and perhaps a bit reassuring.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned potential threats to this new piece.
I did.
What are the major areas of concern moving forward?
Well, several potential challenges are frequently discussed.
No.
One involves this complex relationship between the Muslim world and violence.
Okay.
And it's really important to avoid broad generalizations here
Of course.
because while extremist groups do exist
Yeah.
and perpetrate violence,
Right.
extensive polling data consistently shows that the vast majority of Muslims globally
Yeah.
overwhelmingly reject such violence.
They don't want to have anything to do with it.
Right. They want peace just like everybody else.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. The possibility of nuclear terrorism and the potential for a nuclear-armed Iran are also significant anxieties,
Right.
representing low probability but potentially catastrophic events.
Yeah.
And then you have climate change,
Yeah.
which is another factor that some researchers fear could exacerbate resource scarcity
Right.
and potentially lead to increased conflict.
Yeah.
Although the direct causal links are still being studied and debated.
Yeah. So for each of these, it's a situation of maybe, but maybe not.
Maybe, but maybe not.
Yeah. It's worth noting that even within the Muslim world,
Mm-hmm.
the strong local resistance against extremist groups like Al-Qaeda in Iraq in 2007
Right.
demonstrates this powerful rejection of violent extremism from within.
That's right.
It's not just that, everyone's against it. It's like they're against them
Exactly.
from within.
Yeah.
Okay, so while significant challenges and potential risks remain,
They do.
the overall trend of declining large-scale conflict is still a powerful and important one to recognize.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's now shift our focus to another crucial aspect of declining violence,
Okay.
what you term the rights revolution.
Yeah.
This seems to encompass a broad range of positive social changes.
Absolutely. The rights revolutions refer to a series of parallel and interconnected declines in violence and cruelty
Yeah.
directed towards specific groups
Oh, yeah.
that have historically faced marginalization, oppression, and abuse.
Right.
This includes racial minorities, women, children, LGBTQ+ individuals, and even animals. It represents a significant broadening of the sphere of moral consideration and empathy.
So we're expanding the circle
We're expanding the circle, exactly.
of who deserves
Who deserves, moral consideration.
moral consideration and to be free from violence.
That's right.
Yeah, you have a particularly striking visual example of this shift with changing attitudes towards interracial marriage in the United States.
Yeah. Figure 7-7 provides this really powerful visual representation of this transformation.
Yeah.
The percentage of white Americans expressing disapproval of interracial marriage
Yeah.
has plummeted dramatically.
Radically.
Yeah, over the past several decades,
Wow.
indicating this profound shift in societal norms and acceptance
Right.
regarding racial equality and personal autonomy.
It's amazing how quickly it's changed
It is amazing.
in a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a compelling illustration of how deeply ingrained prejudices
Yeah.
can be challenged and
Oh.
ultimately changed.
It can be.
Now let's delve into some of these specific rights revelations,
Okay.
starting with women's rights and the documented decline in instances of rape and domestic battering.
All right.
It's sobering to consider the historical context.
It is.
Historically, in many societies, women were legally and socially considered the property of men.
Mm.
Consequently, rape was often viewed as a crime against a husband or father,
Yeah.
an infringement on their property rights,
Right.
rather than a violent assault against the woman herself.
That's crazy.
I know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Legal and moral frameworks frequently prioritized the interests of men
Right.
and largely disregarded the victim's experience and autonomy.
Yeah.
However, our contemporary understanding recognizes rape as a heinous act of violence
Yeah.
against the individual woman,
Mm-hmm.
representing a fundamental reevaluation and reweighting of societal values and legal protections.
It is a complete 180.
Right, it's a huge change.
Yeah.
And the available data indicates a decrease in these forms of violence over time.
Yeah. While perhaps not as widely discussed as the decline in homicide,
Hmm.
data suggests a significant reduction in reported rape rates in the United States,
Okay.
particularly since the 1970s.
Okay.
This likely reflects a confluence of factors, including the tireless activism of feminist movements
Yeah.
that brought these issues into public consciousness.
Right.
Legislative changes like the Violence Against Women Act
Yeah.
that strengthened legal protections and support for victims, and improvements in law enforcement responses and societal awareness.
So it's kind of like a bunch of different things all happening at the same time.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And domestic violence is a more complex issue
It is.
with ongoing challenges.
Yeah.
But it too has seen increased awareness,
Absolutely.
legal reforms, and the development of support services,
Mm-hmm.
even if the problem persists.
Right. It's not gone away completely,
Right.
but
It's getting better.
yeah, it's getting better.
Yeah. It's a powerful reminder that social progress often requires sustained advocacy
Yes.
and legal and institutional change.
Yeah, it doesn't happen overnight.
It doesn't happen overnight.
And it doesn't happen passively.
Right? You have to work at it.
You do.
What about children's rights?
Yeah.
That's another area where modern sensibilities differ so dramatically from historical norms.
Well, absolutely infanticide.
Infanticide.
The killing of newborn infants was a tragically common practice
Yeah.
across numerous cultures and throughout much of history.
Wow.
Anthropological research suggests it was accepted in the vast majority of non-state societies
Yeah.
and even practiced in seemingly advanced civilizations.
Crazy to think about.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, the dramatic decline in infanticide in the Western world is
Yeah.
linked to this complex interplay of factors, including increased affluence leading to greater value placed on individual children,
Right.
advancements in technology like contraception and abortion that provide alternatives to unwanted births, and this fundamental shift in the societal evaluation.